Edinburgh is one of the most dramatic cities in Europe. Built around steep hills and dominated by a massive volcanic rock, the city has a landscape unlike almost any other in the world. But long before it became the capital of modern Scotland, Edinburgh was a small yet strategically powerful medieval town shaped by war, trade, and the rugged geography of the Scottish lowlands. Around the year 1300, Edinburgh stood at the center of a turbulent period in Scottish history, when kingdoms clashed and control of the city meant control of one of the most important strongholds in the region. At the heart of the city stood Edinburgh Castle, built atop a massive volcanic formation known as Castle Rock. This natural fortress rises more than 130 meters above the surrounding land, creating a defensive position that had attracted settlers for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests that people lived on this rock long before the medieval city appeared below it. By the early Middle Ages, Castle Rock had already become one of the most important fortified locations in Scotland, offering both protection and a commanding view of the surrounding landscape. By the late 13th century, Edinburgh Castle had evolved into one of the principal royal fortresses of the Scottish kingdom. Kings used it not only as a defensive stronghold, but also as a place of administration and governance. Important documents were stored within its walls, royal treasures were protected in its chambers, and military commanders organized defenses from its towers. From this elevated position, the castle overlooked the surrounding countryside and controlled the routes that connected eastern Scotland with the rest of the kingdom. Below the castle, the early city of Edinburgh began to form along a narrow ridge that extended eastward from Castle Rock. This ridge would eventually become known as the Royal Mile, one of the most famous streets in Scotland. In the year 1300, however, it was simply the main spine of the settlement, a crowded road lined with houses, workshops, and market stalls. The street followed the natural slope of the land, descending gradually away from the fortress above. The buildings of medieval Edinburgh were modest but practical. Many houses were constructed from timber frames filled with stone or clay, while wealthier structures used heavier stone walls. Roofs were steep to allow rainwater to run off quickly in the often wet Scottish climate. Because space along the ridge was limited, buildings were frequently narrow and tall, sometimes rising several stories high. The lower floors typically served as workshops or small shops, while families lived in the rooms above. Life along the main street was lively and often chaotic. Merchants displayed their goods along the roadside, selling wool, tools, fabrics, bread, and imported items that had traveled across Europe. Fishermen from coastal communities brought their catches inland to sell in the markets, while farmers from surrounding villages arrived with livestock, vegetables, and dairy products. The smells of cooking fires, animals, leather, and wood smoke filled the air of the narrow streets. Despite its growing activity, Edinburgh in 1300 remained relatively small by European standards. While cities like Paris and Constantinople were home to tens or even hundreds of thousands of people, Edinburgh's population likely numbered only a few thousand residents. Yet its strategic importance made it far more significant than its size might suggest. The city functioned as an administrative hub, a defensive stronghold, and an important point of control for the surrounding region. This period in Scottish history was marked by intense political struggle. The late 13th century saw the beginning of the Wars of Scottish Independence, a conflict between Scotland and England that would shape the future of the nation. English forces led by King Edward launched invasions into Scotland, capturing several key fortresses in an effort to assert English dominance. Edinburgh Castle itself fell under English control for a time, demonstrating just how valuable the stronghold had become in the struggle for power. The presence of soldiers and fortifications was therefore a constant part of life in the city. Guards patrolled the castle walls, while watchmen monitored the surrounding countryside for signs of approaching armies. Supplies such as grain, weapons, and timber were stored inside the fortress to prepare for possible sieges. The people living below the castle understood that their city stood on a frontier of conflict, and the threat of war was never far away. The geography of Edinburgh also shaped the way the city developed. To the north lay a marshy valley that would later become known as Norloch. In the medieval period, This wet and uneven ground formed a natural barrier that helped protect the settlement from attack. To the south stretched a landscape of hills and rugged terrain that further limited the directions from which enemies could approach. These natural defenses made Edinburgh easier to defend, but also constrained how far the early town could expand. Religion played an important role in the daily lives of Edinburgh's inhabitants. Churches and small chapels served as centers of community life, where residents gathered not only for worship, but also for social interaction and public announcements. Religious institutions often provided support to the poor, the sick, and travelers passing through the city. The influence of the church could be seen in many aspects of medieval life, shaping moral beliefs, education, and local traditions. Daily routines in the city followed the rhythms of medieval society. Craftsmen worked long hours producing tools, clothing, and household goods. Bakers prepared bread in communal ovens while blacksmiths forged iron tools and horseshoes. Children helped their families with tasks or learned trades through apprenticeships. Markets brought together people from across the region, turning the city into a center of exchange and communication. The castle above remained the dominant presence over the entire settlement. Its stone walls and towers rose dramatically from the rock, visible from miles away across the surrounding countryside. Within its defenses were halls for royal gatherings, storage rooms filled with provisions, and quarters for soldiers stationed at the fortress. Banners representing the ruling authority flew above its walls, symbolizing the political power concentrated in this strategic location. Travelers approaching Edinburgh from afar would first notice the silhouette of Castle Rock rising above the landscape. As they came closer, the cluster of houses along the ridge would appear below the fortress, forming the beginnings of a true urban center. Traders arriving from other regions brought not only goods, but also news and ideas, connecting the city to wider networks of commerce and culture. Although Edinburgh in the year 1300 was still a relatively modest settlement, its foundations for future growth were already firmly in place. Its location between the Scottish Highlands and the eastern coast made it an ideal administrative and commercial center. Over the following centuries, the city would expand along the ridge and beyond its early boundaries, gradually transforming into the capital of Scotland. Stone buildings would replace many of the early wooden houses, the Royal Mile would become a prominent urban corridor, and the castle would remain the defining landmark of the city. Yet even as Edinburgh grew and evolved, the fundamental structure established during the medieval period continued to shape its development. Today, visitors walking through the historic heart of Edinburgh can still sense the echoes of this early medieval town. The castle still crowns Castle Rock, dominating the skyline just as it did 7 centuries ago. The Royal Mile still follows the ridge where the first houses clustered together beneath the fortress. Narrow alleyways branch from the main street, some tracing paths that date back to the earliest days of the city. The Edinburgh of 1300 was a place defined by resilience, strategy, and adaptation to a dramatic natural landscape. It was a city where merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and farmers built their lives under the watchful presence of a towering fortress. Though small in size, it stood at the center of political struggles and regional trade, shaping the course of Scottish history. From this compact medieval settlement would emerge one of the most historic and recognizable cities in Europe. Edinburgh's castle, its narrow streets, and its commanding position atop volcanic rock ensured that the city would remain a central stage in the story of Scotland for centuries to come.